All right, so just a couple quick points before we get started. I want to remind everybody, right, that our first group presentation is going to be taking place next week, right? The group that's presenting on Lysistrata is up next week. So, you know, if you're having any issues, you're having any difficulties with any of your group members, if you're having any difficulties just getting something together, figuring out what to do, please come and talk to me, right? Please just come and let me know what's up. Also, along similar lines, there are a few people who are still coming to class but aren't actually on my roster anymore. The fact that you're still coming to class suggests to me that you don't intend to drop the class, that you still want to be here. So it's probably something with student accounts. So you will probably want to go and resolve that with them as quickly as possible. Okay, right, that out of the way. Let's talk about Medea. How'd this go for you? What'd you think? Is she irredeemably awful?
Yes. She was only worried about her name. Her name was her pride. It was everything. She said she killed her children. She said that she didn't want no enemy will treat their graves with outrage. But I don't think they would have done that when Jason was marrying into royalty.
Are you sure about that? What's Medea's social status compared to that of the princess Jason is marrying?
Well, she was royalty.
Pardon?
She was.
She was royalty, right? In her homeland. She is far away from her homeland, right? And how do the Greeks, the good people of Hellas, view people from Medea's homeland? They're barbarians, yes. Filthy, dirty savages, right? Might as well be cyclopses. So, without a Greek husband to protect her or her half-barbarian children, Medea is actually in an extremely difficult spot. Right? The fact that Jason has left her for a Greek woman, for a Greek princess in particular, leaves both her and her children vulnerable. Because should those children from the second marriage live to adulthood and inherit the throne of Corinth, are they going to want those semi-barbarian half-siblings hovering around?
Bastard children.
Yeah, not only that, yeah, they're bastard children, they're from an outcast race, and we see when Jason initially brings them in, right, the princess reacts to them with disgust. So, from a certain perspective, now, I get what you're saying about her ultimate reasons for killing the children rather than taking them out into exile, right? The desire not to be laughed at. But I think that the way the play situates our relationship to Medea is a little bit more complicated. Right? She has been genuinely wronged, right? At least sort of from an emotional, ethical perspective. Now, from a Greek legal perspective, has Jason actually done anything wrong? No. A Greek man can, frankly, do whatever he wants with his wife. She's basically his property. If he grows tired of her, he can send her back to her family and keep the children. Though Jason, at least initially here, shows no interest in keeping the children. And can Medea actually be sent back to her family?
No.
No.
Nope. No going back there. Why not?
Because she betrayed them.
She killed her brother.
Yeah, she killed her brother for love of Jason, right?
She just remembered her brother.
Yeah.
So,
And
she's got nowhere to go, and the person she thought she was going to be with, up and left her. So essentially,
Yeah.
she, lost her mind and didn't see any other way.
But
Yeah.
she was invited to go to Athens. That was her sanctuary. That was her
Yeah,
salvation.
exactly. She does manage to set up a kind of sanctuary for herself, right? Through this conversation with King Aegeus, who just happens to conveniently show up at just the time when she needs to find sanctuary.
But when that happens, like they have an entire conversation about how am I supposed to trust you, and after what just happened, why would she trust anybody?
Sure.
That's not a
Mm-hmm.
like that's not a stable plan. That still isn't enough to convince her to like not kill her kids because she
Mhm.
thinks she has no other option. Like she's not in her right state of mind.
Yeah, but
It's
she
not-
goes there anyways.
Kids.
She kills her kids, and then she tells Jason, "I'm going there anyways," because they made a pact
Mhm.
with the gods.
Well, here's the other thing to note as well. Like, what's the gender of the children? They're both sons, right? They're boys. If Jason's new wife is dead and his existing sons are dead, what does that mean ultimately for Jason?
He has no hair.
Yeah, line ends with him.
Which means when
Stops
he goes
there.
to the underworld, there will be nobody there to remember him, right?
Yep, no legacy in the upper world, right? Remember Achilles, remember Agamemnon, right? Remember the shade of Odysseus' mother going on about, where is my son, where is my son, where is my son? The son is the person who carries your name up above when you're down below. And by killing the two sons, she robs Jason of that, right? Jason will have no legacy, no heritage.
You could
So-
just get another wife, though.
He could. Does that look all that likely?
No.
Yeah, I mean, she leaves him pretty broken. I mean, you know, the part of the purpose of killing the children is to destroy Jason. And yeah, I mean, that may indeed seem sort of petty and vindictive, but it's really, I mean, it's hard to either fully sympathize, it's hard to fully sympathize with Medea the way she's depicted in the play. And I think that is set up on purpose, right? You know, we are talking about a barbarian character being presented to a Greek audience. And so, the barbarian character would, in the interest of naturalism, be presented as a little bit alien. Right? Having a moral code that does not accord with that.
But I mean, like, I
Of the Greeks.
sympathize with her. Like, as a modern audience, I feel like we should be able to sympathize with her more because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she just keeps getting it over and over again.
But,
She keeps killing.
But she's also like that. She's traumatized to the point where she can't function. She's not thinking logically like we are when we're reading it.
Well, and
she
I-
is so far gone that to her that makes sense.
is she actually not thinking logically throughout
No.
this?
I think there's some logic to it.
She's incredibly intelligent, and she sets these elaborate schemes in motion, right? So there is actually a logic to her actions, and I think it's kind of dangerous to try to read too much modern psychology onto ancient texts, right? The Greeks, for example, wouldn't have known anything about trauma or about PTSD or that sort of thing, right? I mean, they would have recognized maybe, okay, you know, there are some old war veterans who show signs of problems now and again, right? But they wouldn't have recognized any, like what we would call, say, PTSD. They wouldn't really have recognized trauma as a thing. What they would have recognized was what they might have called hysteria.
That's only attributed to females.
Yeah.
That, I mean, it's that in and of itself is really biased.
Well, yeah. Right. We're talking about the Greeks.
But still, they are recognizing it. They're just not recognizing it in the
They're-
ways that we would today.
They're not
Just not
recognizing it as
recognizing it.
madness. They're not recognizing it as insanity. Hyster is Greek for uterus. So what they are recognizing in kind of an over-emotional, over-dramatic, histrionic display is what they regarded as typical female behavior. Right? Remember that Greek gender divisions were very, very rigid, very, very strict. Right? The masculine stereotype is calm, rational, and continent, right? Able to control himself. Strong-willed.
The story was probably written by him, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it absolutely is. Although Euripides typically shows more sympathy for female characters than other Greek playwrights do. Euripides, I'll talk a little bit about the three great ancient Greek playwrights in a minute, but Euripides, among the three of them, is the wild-eyed liberal. The other two are a lot more conservative in their values. Now, the feminine stereotype among the Greeks was over-emotional, excitable, and always horny, right? Oversexed,
And doesn't that
obsessed with sex.
That actually goes to hysteria, though. Didn't most of them believe that basically, if they didn't get it out somehow, they were gonna just like go hysterical?
Well, this is if we look at the accusations that Jason levels at Medea here, right? He's constantly how she's just upset about her bed. Right. She's just upset, essentially, he's saying that she's not getting any anymore. And that she should just get over it. So,
Jason also is upset about his bride's dead.
yeah. And that's the hypocrisy here, right? Does Jason actually fit the calm, rational, controlled Greek male stereotype? No, I mean, essentially, yeah, he has followed his nether parts into a younger woman's bed. Right? That's the big offense here, right? That he's committed against his wife. And does Medea actually fit the over-emotional, excitable, oversexed, dumb stereotype?
According to Jason, she does.
According to Jason, she does, right?
But according to the chorus and everybody else, they say, yeah, we get why you're pissed.
Yeah. And if we look at the chorus in this play, right? In older plays, the chorus tends to be made up of like, they represent the male elders of whatever that is, like the important people, you know, delivering the people's verdict on the actions of the hero, right? What's the chorus made up of in this play?
Women.
Yeah, it's the Corinthian women, who at least up to a certain point are willing to sympathize with Medea. They're not quite willing to go all the way with her. They're not willing to condone the murder of the children, but they are willing to stand with her in her difficulties with her husband. Now, we also get sympathy for Medea from the nurse and the tutor, right? The two sort of family slaves who spend most of their time in the home with the children. So it seems like, by and large, Medea's support in the play comes from the characters who would be second or third class citizens, right? People who would also be kind of othered in this society, who would be regarded as not terribly important. Whereas most of her opposition comes from elites, right? From Jason and from King Creon. And from Creon's daughter, whom we never actually see, right? We just hear about her being burned alive by Medea's poison gift in hard ways. So, how many of you know anything about Greek drama? How many of you have read any Greek plays before? Know anything about how it was staged, why it was staged? Yeah, Luke.
I know the last time I said there were certain masks on stage.
Yeah, actually, yeah, they always wear masks. Actors always wear masks. And the masks are not realistic. The masks are sort of heavily stylized, usually made out of like terracotta. and they wore, elaborate heavy robes, and the acting style seems to have been non-naturalistic, non-realistic, right? Greek plays are very talky. A lot of people standing and posing and saying a speech. You only get much movement from the chorus. The chorus dances back and forth. This is we only saw strophe and antistrophe in the choral odes. Choral odes in a Greek play usually occur in 3 parts. The strophe is spoken by the chorus in a particular meter, and they dance, I think, to the right. I may have the directions mixed up here a little bit, but the basic idea holds. The antistrophe, they sing a few lines in the same meter, and they dance to the left. The epode, they sing a few lines in a different meter and stand still. And this actually points to the origins of Greek theater. This is the part of these plays that is retained from their historical antecedents. Now, the piece of music I was playing for you at the beginning of class is the instrumental part of what's called a dithyramb, right? D-I-T-H-Y-R-A-M-B. And dithyrambs were hymns, essentially, that were performed by a chorus. Wealthy Athenians would, at the time of a particular religious festival, hire a poet and a chorus to perform, and the winning chorus and the winning poet got a prize, usually a goat. Hence, tragedy from Tragos, goat song. So these choral odes are the oldest part of Greek drama. Now, eventually, the poets start adding an actor who interacts with the chorus. And by the time Euripides is writing, you have plays that include 3 actors interacting with the chorus. Now, 3 actors, right, but we have more than 3 characters here, right? How they handle that?
They just replayed the roles.
Exactly, double casting, yeah. You will never see more than 3 named characters on stage at a time in a Greek play. 3 named characters in the chorus. In order to come back as another character, you just go backstage, change your mask, and come back out.
But when the children are on, there are like 4 or 5 on stage.
Yeah, well, the children wouldn't have really counted.
Because they didn't have lines.
Yeah, well, they do. I mean, they shout from behind the backdrop.
Don't kill us.
Yeah, please stop. Okay, so does anybody know who this is?
Can we guess Dionysus?
Yes, because you can read the thing at the top, right? Of course.
He's
Yes.
got hearts on him.
What's that?
There's hearts.
Those are not hearts, actually. Does anybody know what those are meant to represent?
Like the gods.
Yeah, I mean, gods are often crowned with these kinds of
Like a vine?
leaves. Yeah, they're vine leaves, exactly.
Well, those are really horribly done vines.
Well, talk to the Greeks about it.
They need to work on their vines further.
All right, so Dionysus, wearer of the vine leaves, wearer of the leopard skin, holder of the cup. Does anybody know what Dionysus is the god of?
Wine.
Wine is the big thing, right? Wine is the big thing. He's also associated with other concepts that are related to wine. On the one hand, he's a fertility god. And most ancient gods, as we probably figured out by now, are on some level fertility gods, right? Most ancient religions were primarily concerned with fertility. He is also a god of chaos and frenzy, right? The emotions that overindulgence in wine can bring on. this also makes him, because how comfortable do you think the Greeks are with chaos and frenzy?
They're not.
No, not at all.
They pride themselves on order and rules and laws.
Yeah. Yeah, chaos not okay. Chaos not cool. So, as a god of chaos and frenzy, he also becomes a sort of god of foreignness and of foreigners. There was a theory going among mythologists for a while that Dionysus was actually imported into the Greek pantheon from elsewhere, but most available evidence today suggests that actually he was always a part of Greek religion, but he always represented the other. He always kind of represented the alien. Now, once a year, in the city of Athens, they would host a festival in Dionysus' honor. For most of the year, the god's idol was kept in a shrine outside the city, because this was stuff you didn't want inside your nice, orderly, well-regulated city.
They had wine.
Yes, they did have wine, but they didn't want the chaos and the frenzy and the other things associated with it. So, for most of the year, the god's idol is kept outside the city. Once a year in the spring, planting season, they bring it inside the walls with a huge procession involving lots of music and dancing. Dionysus is also a god of dance. And people waving phallic symbols in the air. Because again, fertility god. So, these dithyramb competitions that evolve into drama originate in these fertility celebrations for the god Dionysus. And Dionysus and the qualities associated with Dionysus remain a part of Greek theater and Greek drama throughout its history. Not only is the festival called, it's the city Dionysia, but the way tragedy is described as working in its ideal form is very much related to these Dionysian concepts. Any of you familiar at all with Aristotle?
Unfortunately.
What do you know about Aristotle?
Ideology, numerous methods, like...
Let's talk about what he had to say about poetry and drama. Do we know anything about that? Okay.
Political only.
Pardon?
I only know the politics of it, like political philosophies.
Okay, well, those don't really enter into it right now.
Nope.
We're just looking at his aesthetic philosophy right now. So Aristotle wrote a two-part work called the Poetics. Part one, which we still have, describes tragedy. Part two, which is lost, describes comedy. We know about it because other writers who were contemporaries or who came after Aristotle have described it. So we know it existed, or at least we're fairly certain it existed. Now, one thing that's kind of cool about the Poetics, or at least I think this is kind of cool because, you know, I'm a nerd who hates football and this is just the kind of thing that I like. What we actually have in the Poetics is Aristotle's lecture notes to his students. They're not intended as, you know, a treatise to be circulated or published amongst the wider population. It's just, yeah, it's a series of lecture notes. So take that for what you will. But what's most important here for our purposes is what Aristotle has to say about the purpose of tragedy. Right? On the one hand, right, it brings the whole community together. Right? Everybody comes together at the city Dionysia to watch these plays, to observe these plays. And through evoking feelings of pity and fear at the fate of the tragic characters. Aristotle argues the tragedy affects, when it works properly, what he calls a catharsis. Now, catharsis in Greek means purging. And what this is generally taken to mean in context is a kind of total washout of your negative emotions, right? The tragedy is supposed to build you to a kind of fever pitch, right? Get all these chaos and frenzy feelings out so that you can go back to being orderly and rational and reasonable for the rest of the year. So you just have these couple of days of total all-out riot, right? The play focuses your emotions in a constructive direction and purges them, and then everything goes back to normal until next year, when they bring the idol back into the city again.
This is like Mardi Gras.
Yeah, it's not unlike Mardi Gras or Carnival. Yeah, it's a similar principle at work. Yeah, Darlene.
So when Medea was written, were plays a regular thing, or were they still only during the festivals?
They were still typically only during the festivals. There were more festivals during the year in the 5th century when Euripides was writing than there had been originally, because the plays were really popular. And they had spread throughout Greece. Right, there were theaters in places other than Athens by this point. But yeah, I mean, the big competition was still this religious ritual, this religious festival once a year in the spring. So yeah, so these are certainly the formative ideas behind much of what's going on in Euripides. And when we talk about this purging, if we look at the way tragedies are usually set up, what do you guys know? When I say the word tragedy, what does this make you think of? What does a tragedy look like to you?
Death.
Pardon?
Death.
Okay, death is one thing that we tend to think of in tragedy, right? Although they don't always feature deaths,
Like
right?
crimes or something like that?
Pardon?
Like crimes or something like that, like a tragedy, like a crime or...
Somebody will often commit a crime, yeah.
I always just think about Romeo and Juliet. I don't know why. But that's like the only thing I think of when I hear the word tragedy.
Sadness.
struggle
It's
of
like,
the main
yeah,
character.
there's.
I'm sorry, Harley?
Like the struggle of the main character,
And like these intricate plot twists. Everybody ends up miserable at the end.
Actually, Greek tragedies are rarely terribly intricate in their plotting. The plots are usually pretty simple, and they usually follow a pretty basic formula. Right? You have someone who either has good fortune or bad fortune at the beginning of the play. They undergo a reversal, and then at the end of the play, if their fortune was bad at the beginning, it's good at the end. If it was good at the beginning, it's bad at the end. So Greek tragedies don't always end unhappily. The way they end depends on the way they begin. So the important element being that reversal of fortune. Now, as far as the characterization we see in a Greek tragedy, usually we are given characters who are of high social status, right? Kings, queens, princes, princesses, heroes, and they're almost always characters that would be familiar to the Greek audience, right? Greek playwrights did not invent characters, and they usually did not invent plots. Most plots are taken from literature, from mythology. Some, a small minority are taken from historical events. But the vast majority are taken from mythology. Now, another thing about the characters, the main characters in particular, according to Aristotle, should be neither wholly bad nor wholly good. Right? People who are a mixture of good and bad. And the reversal in the character's fortune will be affected by what Aristotle calls hamartia, or an error in judgment. Right? Particularly in the good fortune to bad fortune tragedy.
How do you spell the?
Hamartia.
But that's actually kind of like a refreshing compared to some of these other ones that like are always concerned about fate. Like it's more easy to digest if something bad happens to the main character if they actually like caused it.
Well, let's slow down there a minute. Fate actually does play a role in most of these. If we look, for example, at the most famous example of tragedy, and what Aristotle called the perfect Greek tragedy, Oedipus the King, the difficulties encountered by the hero in that play result from his and his parents' attempts to dodge prophecy, right? To dodge fate. So, yeah, fate, look, I mean, fate is all over this culture, right?
It's so horrible. It's hard to accept fate as an answer. Like you want to see.
Well, but that's the thing, like, you don't have to accept fate as an answer. You just have to accept that they did. Right. This is, one thing that I'm trying to get at here is, like, you don't have to agree with the values of this particular culture, right? I'm just trying to get you to see it from their perspective, right? I'm trying to get you to see it the way they would have seen it. And it's totally fine to not align yourself with those values. I'm just asking you to try to understand them. Yeah, Darlene.
So would the Greek audiences have been on Medea's side or Jason's side?
Well, hard to say. We know in general that Euripides was popular with audiences. He was not popular with the judges of the competition. He wrote 90-some plays over the course of a very long career. And he only won the competition 5 times, twice after he died. But we have more surviving plays by Euripides than any of the other 3 great Greek playwrights, and a lot of contemporary evidence that suggests that he was in fact very popular. Elites didn't. The elites who judged the competition didn't like him. Ordinary people really liked his plays.
Is it because, like, the reversal of fortune, does it give them hope, like common people hope that they could rise into power, kind of like in medieval literature, like the Wheel of Fortune?
Yeah, and that's kind of hard to say. And I think, like, one of the things that's interesting about this play is we have a kind of double reversal, right? Medea's fortune goes from bad to arguably good at the end.
Considering...
And Jason's fortune goes from good to bad, right? So there is a kind of wheel... I'm glad that you actually brought up that analogy of the Wheel of Fortune, because there is a kind of wheel structure in this play, right? As one character goes down, the other goes up. Almost literally, right? When we see Medea exiting the stage, how is she leaving? Yeah, a dragon-drawn chariot, right? And this is actually one of the things that tended to get Euripides in hot water with cultural elites in particular, was the attitude he tends to display towards the gods in his plays.
Yeah.
Why is it that Medea is able to get away with what she's done? Yeah. My grandfather's the sun, right? And the gods play favorites. The gods, by and large, will disregard what she's done here because she's family.
But did that cause issues with them? That's not the first time that that's been showcased. Like, he wasn't the first author to suggest that.
Euripides really rubbed it in their faces a lot. I mean, here you've got, a woman with the blood of her children on her hands. Or, well, because all Greek actors were male, a man playing a woman with the blood of his/her children on his hands. And the gods just say, well, okay, we're going to save you because you're a relative, because you're family. Yes, yes. Well, Jason will be struck by a piece of wood from his rotting ship and die a miserable, lonely death because he offended you. But see, this is the other thing I wanted to get to when we talk about catharsis, is that it actually does have something to do with characterization in these plays as well. The tragedy almost always ends with some person or persons leaving the stage for good, leaving the city for good, going away. And this person is almost always a troublemaker. So one of the things that a tragedy does, right, one of the other things it purges, right, it purges troublesome people. It gets rid of the person causing chaos. It gets rid of the person who's making difficulties. So in this case, the cause of the chaos, the person who has caused all the trouble, is Medea, the hysterical barbarian woman. So while she arguably wins, she still has to go. She still has to get out at the end of the play. She has to be purged. So that life in Corinth can more or less go back to normal. As normal as it can be with the entire royal family dead. So that's basically how tragedy works. That's the background behind it. Let's try and dig a little bit deeper into the play itself here. Were there any particular lines or portions that really stuck out to you? Anything that really struck you that you wanted to talk about? What did you guys write about?
I wrote about the nurse.
The nurse? Okay, why'd you write about the nurse, Jody?
Basically, I guess she was trying to keep the kids from being harmed by their mother, through
Okay.
all the times. And by her, I guess keeping the kids away, that made her happy and made her feel better, for their protection. That was her responsibility, that came in from recess or whatever, playing outside.
Yeah, they've got the people with the most contact with the children would have been servants, right?
Yes, sir.
We have this nurse and this tutor, right? And servant is actually kind of a nice euphemism for them. They would have been slaves. Most child rearing in elite Greek households was left up to slaves. And yeah, these are both people in caregiving professions. So one thing to note here, and we touched on this a little while ago, right? Generally the people who give care, the people who give emotional support in this play are people of low social status. Right. The elites in the play are concerned mostly for themselves. Even Aegeus' promise to Medea, right, there's a quid pro quo there, right? You tell me what this prophecy means and get yourself to Athens on your own, and I'll protect you from your enemies.
Was that another reason that the higher up people didn't like Euripides? Because he showed the high people as being selfish and the lower people as being normal?
Yeah, he tends to be, of the three great Greek playwrights, he's the most, he puts commoners on stage a lot more often, for one thing. And he puts much more sympathetic lines and attitudes into their mouths. The big three of Athenian drama are Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Right. Euripides is the youngest. Aeschylus is the oldest. And Aeschylus's most famous plays are a trilogy called the Oresteia, which are about the murder of Agamemnon by his wife, and the quest of Agamemnon's son Orestes to avenge his father's murder. Aeschylus tends to be the most poetically and thematically conservative of the big three Athenian dramatists. Right? Most of his plays, by and large, affirm traditional Greek values and reverence for the gods.
How much more conservative could you get? Like, I mean, these are pretty conservative as they are. What were the themes on that one then? Like,
Well, Orestes, in killing his mother to avenge his father, like the plays actually do center on that kind of moral dilemma, right? On the one hand, killing your mother was considered about the most unnatural thing you could do by the Greeks. Horrible crime. But he does it to avenge his father. And the insult to the father is of greater concern to the gods in the end than the insult to the mother. Right? It ends with Orestes being absolved of his mother's murder because he did it to avenge his father. So it reinforces the Greek gender binary in a much, much stronger way. Sophocles is most famous for his Oedipus plays, in which this sort of overweening, prideful, hubristic hero puts his own interests and talents ahead of the needs of his people. And Euripides is mostly famous for plays in which elites are taken down a peg, even the gods. In fact, especially the gods. Now, if we go back to this thing about the nurse and the tutor that Jody pointed us to, even though the tutor is a man, because these are household slaves, they would have both belonged to the feminine side of the Greek oikos. Does everybody remember what oikos is, what this concept means?
Household?
Yeah, it's a household. And how does it work for the Greeks?
the woman is, as you go further back, it's the woman,
Mhm.
her stuff. At the
Yep.
very beginning, you have male.
Yep, the woman is responsible for the hearth and the inner living areas of the house, and the man is responsible for the outer portion of the house that is open to the public, right? Gender divided household, which is supposed to be reflective of the different social roles of men and women. So for the Greeks, this was the basic building block of society, right? A well-ordered oikos was the basis of a well-ordered, well-regulated society. If you had trouble in the oikos, this was going to reverberate throughout the rest of your little city-state, right? So how is Medea problematic from the beginning for this particular concept? How has she built her reputation? What sorts of things is she famous for?
She's wise.
She's wise. From the standpoint of someone like Creon, a little bit too wise, right? What sorts of things has she done with her wisdom? What do we know about her history? Yeah, She chopped up her brother and betrayed her father, right?
Did she
She's like a
convince
witch,
herself?
isn't she?
She's referred to as a witch, yeah. Which doesn't necessarily have the same negative connotations for the Greeks that it does for us. But yeah, she is known for her skills with spells and potions, right? And this is like woman's magic, you'll find in Greek, is often described as what's called polypharmakon. That's Polypharmakon, which translates to many drugs. Right, women's magic is dependent upon potions, upon drugs, upon herbs. Men's magic, on the other hand, is typically described, this is a word that's often used to describe Odysseus, actually, as polymetis. Polymetis. Many thoughts. So the implication here being that women's magic comes from something outside of themselves, right? From learning to manipulate these natural forces. And men's magic comes from within, from their own sort of native brilliance.
Wouldn't that also kind of like, how would that fit in with the gods? Would the gods be considered magic or no?
No, gods are gods. Gods can do whatever the hell they want because they're gods. No, magic is something that is largely sort of restricted. And we do see characters who are described as minor goddesses or gods, sometimes performing, like Circe, for example, is a kind of minor goddess. She's Medea's aunt, actually. And she is described in the Odyssey as polypharmakon. Right? She accomplishes her goals through her many drugs. But to get back to sort of this idea of the oikos, right? So as you were pointing out a moment ago, Will, right? Essentially, Medea can't go home because she destroyed that household, right? She destroyed that household and her bonds to that household. Why can't they go back to Jason's home city? What'd she do there?
Didn't she save him from something?
She saved him. Yeah, she's done lots of horrible things to save
She
him.
convinced them to boil.
His uncle?
Yeah, she convinced his cousins to boil his uncle alive. Yes.
To purify him or something?
Yeah, to make him young again, right? Make him live forever.
How does that make sense?
Trickery, right? You know, the way it's presented in the myth, right? She takes an old ram, throws it into the boiling cauldron, and it comes out a young lamb.
She stole the golden fleece from.
Yeah, from her father.
Oh.
Yeah, that's stolen from her father, who was its keeper. But, yeah, so what Medea has built her reputation on is destroying families. She's done it for Jason. Right. It's always been for him. It's always been all about him. But yeah, she is a wrecker. Of the oikos. Everywhere she goes, she destabilizes these households. So from the perspective of a character like Creon, Medea is a threat to the social order. This is the kind of thing that she does. Now, when Jason comes to try to convince her to leave off her ranting about the royal family, what arguments does he use?
About why he left her?
Yeah, let's start there.
So they would have money and stuff.
Because he
Uh-huh.
loved her and wanted the kids to have brothers.
I did it for you, baby, right?
Yeah.
I did it for us. I went and married that younger woman
For you.
for you. so that we could live well and not be poor, right?
So you should keep her that in.
Yeah. And yeah, oh, by the way, you still have to get out of town, right? But I did this for us, right? Now, how much sense does Jason's argument make? If you're looking at it purely from the standpoint of reason and logic, right? He presents evidence, right? He presents a case. And, if you don't let your feelings get in the way, it almost sounds like a reasonable case, right? The problem is, our feelings do get in the way, right? It's a case that makes sense to a robot. It's a case that makes sense to a logic machine. It's not a case that makes sense to a human being with emotions. And thus is probably disingenuous, right? What does he tell her about the benefits that she's received from him?
That he'll set her up financially and he'll tell his friends to give her shelter.
Yeah, well, that's what he promises to do, right? So if we look for a second here on page 800, right? First, he absolves himself of any blame, right? It's not my fault you did those things for me. It was Aphrodite and Eros, right? The gods of love guiding your... It's the gods' fault, not mine. I won't put too fine a point on it. You did support me. You saved my life, in fact. However, you received more than you gave, as I shall prove. So he's speaking here like a rhetorician, right? Like somebody in a debate. First of all, you live in Hellas now, instead of your barbarian land. With us, you know what justice is and civil law, not mere brute force. And every single person in Hellas knows that you are wise. You're famous. You'd never have that kind of reputation if you were living at the edge of nowhere. As for me, I wouldn't wish for gold or for a sweeter song than Orpheus unless I had the fame to match my fortune. So what's the argument he's making here about why Medea should be grateful to him? Yeah, you're famous. But what kinds of things is she famous for? Yeah, exactly. The sorts of things, yeah, that don't get her welcomed in other cities. The sorts of things that make people afraid of her. And what else is funny about, like comically blind about what Jason says here? Is Medea accruing any real advantage from living in Greece? What's happening to her as a result of this civil law and justice?
She's being exiled.
Yeah. Civil law here says she has to go. She has no rights. Civil law says her husband and the king can kick her out of town. Yeah.
So, when I'm reading it, maybe I missed it, but, is he referring to it, they're, even though he married a new woman, is he still considered married to her?
No.
Okay.
The Greeks were not polygamous.
Right.
But if a man got tired of his wife, it was easy for him to divorce her.
Okay.
So if they weren't legally divorced, were there any consequences for adultery or getting married before you were fully divorced?
No.
Okay.
Basically, all a man had to do was announce it.
Okay.
And yeah, as long as we talked about this a little bit when we talked about Odysseus and Circe, right? As long as the adultery was with someone who was not married, i.e. then not someone else's property, that was fine, at least for you, the man, right? It would probably ruin the woman's reputation, unless you then married her.
Which
But
doesn't Medea bring that up about how unfair it is for women to divorce?
yeah, can you point us to that passage, Darlene, actually? That might actually be a good place
I'm
to...
not sure where it is in the, I didn't highlight it.
I think, are you thinking of page 792, when she first steps out?
I think so.
Like around line 231? Of all the living creatures with a soul and mind, we women are the most pathetic. First of all, we have to buy a husband, spend vast amounts of money just to get a master for our body, to add insult to injury. And the stakes could not be higher. Will you get a decent husband or a bad one? If a woman leaves her husband, then she loses her virtuous reputation. To refuse him is just not possible. When a girl leaves home and comes to live with new ways, different rules, she has to be a prophet. Learn somehow the art of dealing smoothly with her bedmate. If we do well, and if our husbands bear the yoke without discomfort or complaint, our lives are admired. If not, it's best to die. A man, when he gets fed up with the people at home, can go elsewhere to ease his heart. He has friends, companions his own age. We must rely on just one single soul. They say that we lead safe, untroubled lives at home while they do battle with a spear. They're wrong. I'd rather take my stand behind a shield 3 times than go through childbirth once. Right? So the argument she's making here is that giving birth is a hell of a lot more painful than getting stabbed. Right? That what a woman has to go through to bear a child is actually worse than what a man has to go through in battle. And she makes it clear here as well that she's just talking about women comparatively who have rights, right? Greek women. Still, my account is quite distinct from yours. This is your city. You have your father's homes. Your lives bring joy and profit. You have friends, but I have been deserted and outraged, left without a city by my husband, who stole me as his plunder from the land of the barbarians. Here I have no mother, no brother, no blood relative to help unmoor me from this terrible disaster. So I'll need to ask you one small favor. If I should find some way, some strategy to pay my husband back, bring him to justice, keep silent. Most of the time, I know, a woman is filled with fear. She's worthless in a battle and flinches at the sight of steel, but when she's faced with an injustice in the bedroom, there is no other mind more murderous. So, what she's pointing out, and I think that this is early in the play, right? This is Medea's first appearance, and it's meant to put us on her side and feel how she's been wronged from the very beginning, to create that kind of cognitive dissonance that you were talking about by the end of the play, Louisa, where it's like, how could someone whose wrong we so clearly felt at the beginning of the play then take our sympathies and discard them in such an apparently callous way? And some of it is just the necessity of the tragic plot, right? That reversal of fortune. And some of it is that this complicated idea and this complicated attitude in the play towards both the status of women and the status of barbarians, foreigners, resident aliens. Right? Medea is dangerous. Medea is a threat to the social order. But is she a threat to the social order if she is treated with kindness and justice? And that's the thought I'm going to leave you with on this. I have some reading questions for next time. We're going to be reading some lyric poetry by Sappho. Most of the poems you're going to be looking at are fragments. We don't have all that much of Sappho's poetry in sort of complete form. So just make what sense you can of the fragments that you're given. Follow the guide questions and make sure you turn in your in-class writings as you go.